Imagine a small hamlet at the edge of a dark forest where superstition clings as tightly as the morning mist. Here, the villagers whisper of uncanny happenings, milk curdling before the pail is full, sudden chills that freeze even the stoutest hearth, children convulsing in their beds as though gripped by unseen claws. Long before Salem or Pendle, medieval Europe trembled under the shadow of suspected witchcraft. The line between healer and heretic was razor thin. Every wise woman tending wounds, every midwife delivering babes, risked sliding from sainted caregiver to dreaded sorceress. One, pagan roots and the power of folk rituals. Centuries before Christian priests arrived, pagan communities honored the spirits of earth, water, and sky. A grove of ancient oak trees served as a sanctuary. Beams of sunlight filtered through moss-draped branches, while stone altars bore offerings of grain, milk, and wildflowers. Here, priestesses, often called tree singers, led seasonal rites that ensured fertile fields and healthy livestock. Narrative scene. At dawn on Beltane, the entire village gathers in the grove. Torches burn bright, drums pound in time with the rising sun. You, a young apprentice to the elder priestess, weave wreaths of hawthorn and rowan. Every petal carries a prayer for protection. The smell of smoke mingles with fresh greenery, an intoxicating promise of renewal. Yet these rituals blurred into suspicion when Christian missionaries labeled them devil worship. By the 8th century, synods condemned pagan ceremonies as heresy, but communities clung to their traditions in secret. A simple blessing over a hearth became coded language for invoking household spirits. To the uninitiated, the same gesture that protected a family from famine looked like a conjuration of demons. 2. Church edicts and the criminalization of witchcraft. Between the 9th and 12th centuries, church councils sought to eradicate pagan vestiges. The Synod of Paris, 829, declared that anyone performing invocations of water nymphs or sylvan sprites deserved excommunication. The Council of Valence, 906, anathematized those who misunderstood divine miracles as nature spirits. These pronouncements laid the theological groundwork. Any unexplained phenomenon could be blamed on sorcery. Case law excerpt, translated, "If any person, man or woman, shall presume to invoke demons under the guise of forest rites, let them be delivered to the secular arm for punishment." Local bishops issued guidelines. Healers must swear oaths of Christian faith. Midwives were mandated to renounce any ancestral charms at baptismal fonts. Yet enforcement was uneven. In remote hamlets, the old ways survived in whispered prayers and hidden herb gardens. 3. The wise woman and the midwife. Healing on the edge of heresy. Wise women held dual identities, beloved for their knowledge of herbs and rituals, yet always vulnerable to suspicion. Their skill with plants often seemed magical. A poultice of plantain could staunch bleeding. A tea of willow bark eased fever. But the same willow bark, whispered villagers, could also wither souls. Dramatized diary entry, c. 1150, June 13th. I crushed yarrow with care, weaving it into linen strips for the constable's wound. He slept peacefully that night. Yet when I walked the lane home, I felt eyes upon me. The children pointed and cried, "The witch walks at midnight." Midwives faced similar danger. Called to deliver a child, they performed rituals to ease pain, anointing with oil consecrated at local shrines, chanting older lullabies in a dialect long disfavored by parish priests. When a birth went wrong, blame too often fell on the midwife, an easy scapegoat for fate's cruelty. 4. Case Vignette, Agnes of Harleston. In 1123, Agnes, known as the herb gatherer of Harleston, earned a modest living brewing salves of thyme and comfrey. Her garden bloomed with medicinal blossoms, her gentle touch eased childbirth pains. But when drought struck and crops failed, tongues turned sharp. Neighbors, fearing starvation, accused her of cursing fields. A monastic inquiry was convened. Agnes stood before a tribunal of 3 monks and the local reeve. They demanded she recite the Lord's Prayer backward as proof of innocence. Shaking, she faltered. Her silence was taken as confession. Stripped of her wares, she endured public flogging. Her salves were burned in a bonfire of distrust. Banished from Harleston, she vanished into the wood's shadows, never to heal another soul. 5. Suspicion spreads from individual to community. Once a single accusation stuck, fear rippled outward. Villagers avoided the accused's home. Children were warned to cross the brook rather than approach her gate. Markets grew wary. Any clay pot that cracked, any sudden illness, or unexpected death in livestock was attributed to her malign will. At harvest time, fields would lie fallow along the edge of the accused's land, an unspoken quarantine. The weave of social bonds frayed, neighbor turned against neighbor, suspicion blossoming like a noxious weed. Thus, suspicion took root not in wild confessions or demonology texts, but in everyday fear, fear of the unknown, fear of the other, and fear that nature itself might be turned against you. The stage was set for formal accusations, trials, and the horrors to come. Herbalists and healers on trial. The moment suspicion hardened into accusation, the accused healer found herself at the mercy of parish courts and itinerant inquisitors. In courtroom tents pitched beside village greens, every herb in her basket became potential proof of devil's work. 1. Common magical herbs and their properties. Medieval herbals listed dozens of plants, each with curative claims that to a fearful mind looked like spells. Artemisia, mugwort, eased women's ailments, repelled evil spirits. Belladonna, deadly nightshade. A poultice to relieve pain, but also in folklore a flying ointment ingredient. Wolfsbane, a aconitum, treated fevers when applied topically, yet ingesting it meant certain death. Mandrake root, believed to cure sterility. Legend held its scream could kill anyone who uprooted it. Herbalist's note, c. 1325. Take mugwort at the new moon, brew in ale until its scent wards the household. Let none who bear ill will cross your threshold thereafter. To an inquisitor, instructions like these read less like medical advice and more like incantations conjuring curses. 2. Verbatim. Reading The Root of All Evil, excerpt from the Hortus Sanitatis, 1491 edition. Mandragora officinarum, when ground with wine and nata, frees the womb of blockages. Yet let the gatherer wear gloves, else the spirit of the earth exact its due by fever or madness. The text's cautionary tone, warning of fever and madness, offered fertile ground for prosecutors to argue the herbalist consorted with spirits beyond God's realm. Elsbeth's ordeal continued into night. The thumbscrews pinched her flesh. She wept and named other women in hopes of mercy. 5. Verdict and sentencing, from penance to pyre. Once proof was procured, sentencing followed swiftly. Penance, flogging, pilgrimage, carrying a cross before congregation. Imprisonment, chains, dungeons, isolated cells. Capital punishment, burning at the stake in Catholic regions. Strangulation, followed by burning in some Protestant areas. A final mass accompanied the condemned's journey to the pyre. Crowds gathered to witness the infernal spectacle, both a warning and a communal purge of evil. 6. Aftermath, property seizure, and social fallout. Churches confiscated the condemned's belongings, local lords awarded lands to loyal supporters, families disgraced, children orphaned, villages scarred by the public ritual of punishment. Confessions and curses. Under the weight of torture and terror, the accused often confessed to deeds of diabolism that transcended reality. Their words spun vivid nightmares, midnight Sabbaths, shape-shifting familiars, pacts sealed in blood. One anatomy of a forced confession. Tortured bodies spoke of familiar spirits, cats, toads, or ravens appearing at command to do the witch's bidding. Witches' Sabbaths, nocturnal gatherings where witches feasted with demons, renamed God's commandments as profanities. Blood pacts, signing covenants with the devil, penning names in tiny books or scratching sigils onto flesh. Confession excerpt, Malleus Maleficarum, Kramer and Sprenger, 1487. They gather at the crossroads, midnight in June, clad in skins and garlands of rue. The devil assigns them tasks: blight the harvest, poison the well, entice the pious to sin. Each line read during trials inflamed imaginations, fueling both inquisitor resolve and public hysteria. 2. Cultural folklore, Sabbaths and flying ointments. Peasant whispers spoke of witches anointing themselves with salves, oils made from deadly nightshade, hemlock, and animal fats, granting them the power of flight to dark forest glens. Recipe. Reading. Take the fat of toad, rosemary, and the marrow of a fox ground under a full moon. Anoint your temples, and you shall soar on scented winds to the Sabbath. Though fantastical, such recipes appeared in grimoires across Europe. Inquisitors pored over these texts, equating clandestine brews with sacrament of evil. 3. The Malleus Maleficarum's influence. Kramer's treatise justified any means to eradicate witches. Since witches be deceivers, denial cannot absolve them. Torture is the only path to uncover their guile. This decree bypassed doubt. Witches were inherently deceitful, so confessions, any confession, were truth. 4. Social chaos and scapegoating. Revelations from trials incited neighbors to accuse more souls. A woman's curse of a neighbor's cow sparked a chain of denunciations. Fields were abandoned, festivals cancelled in fear of gatherings becoming Sabbaths. Eyewitness account, 1589, Pendle Hills. After the trial of old Mother Demings, the entire parish turned on the Catley family. In a fortnight, 6 souls were taken, and no barn dared fill its granary. Communities unraveled as trust evaporated in the wake of confessed sins. 5. Property and power shifts. Confiscated estates enriched magistrates. Nobles used witch trials to settle scores. In some regions, entire villages were auctioned off, the proceeds funding local coffers, proving that witch hunts often disguised greed. Trial by ordeal and execution. The moment of execution was the gruesome crescendo of the medieval witchcraft saga. Punishment served both as divine justice and theatre, designed to deter others and satiate communal fears. 1. Methods of execution. Burning at the stake. The most infamous method, condemned bound to wooden pyres, flames licking their robes as priests recited salvation prayers. Strangulation, then burning. In some Protestant regions, condemned were garroted before pyre, ensuring death before fire consumed flesh. Drowning. Accused bound and thrown into rivers. Floating meant guilt, sinking meant innocence, or simply drowning. Hanged and quartered, rare but used in secular courts. Body parts displayed as warnings. 2. Public spectacle and communal participation. Villagers flocked to see the condemned's final moments. Market stalls sold spiced wine, children darted between legs, collecting embers dropped from pyre poles. Clergy blessed the fires, claiming purification of sin, while onlookers cheered each crackle of bone. Eyewitness Chronicle, 1550, Strasbourg. The fire roared like a living beast. The woman's screams were muffled by the chanting priests. When her right hand collapsed into ash, the crowd fell silent. Only the wind spoke above the cinders. 3. Execution as social control. Local lords leveraged executions to consolidate power, expenses covered by confiscated assets, loyalists rewarded with land. The spectacle reminded every peasant of the price of deviation. Fundraising. Crowds paid fees to witness events, proceeds funded church repairs. Punitive display, displaying severed limbs by city gates, discouraged dissent. Ritual renewal, executions timed with religious festivals, aligning witch purges with holy seasons. 4. Survivor narratives and trauma. Occasionally, a condemned claimed mercy at last minute, denouncing others to save themselves. Those spared, left broken and shunned, bore nightmares, flashbacks of flames, the smell of burning hair, ash in their mouths. Survivor's memoir, c. 1578. I knelt before the stake, promising to name 3 more in hell's name. When the noose snapped around my neck, I saw only smoke and regret. I live still, but every mirror is a pyre in my eyes. 5. Transition from flames to fear's legacy. With each pyre, the memory of terror etched deeper into community psyche. Yet witch hunts did not end with execution. They morphed into legacy, passing fear to next generations and shaping a culture of suspicion. Witchcraft scares and mass panics. When fears of solitary witches erupted into communal hysteria, entire communities turned on themselves. Regional panics spawned trials by the dozens, sometimes hundreds, creating ripple effects that lasted generations. 1. The Würzburg Witch Trials, 1626–1631. In the Prince-Bishopric of Würzburg, paranoia gripped every corner. Bishop Philipp Adolf von Ehrenberg authorized tribunals that tried over 900 accused, over 600 executed. Key features: scale, entire parishes emptied, villagers forced to testify against neighbors. Interconnection, torture centers reported to central authorities, ensuring uniform methods. Aftermath, deserts of farmland where entire families vanished, leaving traces of burnt homes. Court record snippet, 1629. 11 women of the village of Nordheim confessed to attending the Sabbath beneath the Oxenberg. Their souls claimed by the devil, they begged for God's mercy, but the stake awaited. 2. The Pendle Witch Trials, 1612. In Lancashire, England, the famous Pendle trials saw 12 accused, predominantly women, and 1 child executed at Lancaster Castle. Allegations ranged from curses on livestock to infant abduction. Family feuds, rivalries within the Demdike and Chattox families fueled accusations. Child witnesses, Janet Device, age 9, gave sensational testimony that sealed dozens of fates. Cultural echo. The trials inspired countless ballads and tales, embedding witch hunts in English folklore. 3. Mass hysteria, psychological and social factors. Scholars point to social stressors, famine, disease, war, as catalysts. Fear bred fear, economic strain. Crop failures led to scapegoating. Blaming witches diverted blame from rulers. Religious turmoil, Reformation and Counter-Reformation stoked anxiety over spiritual purity. Communal bonding, witch hunts reinforced in-group unity against an other. Academic insight. In his treatise Malleus Maleficarum, Kramer wrote that communal fears justified purges, an echo of scapegoat mechanisms seen in modern crises. 4. Descendants' voices echoes through time. Many families carry oral histories of ancestors who vanished in hunts. In small villages, elderly residents recall dusty church records and yellowed depositions. Interview excerpt, 2021. My great-great-grandmother always warned not to wander near the old oak, where the witches were tried. Now I find my genealogy listing names stricken from records, as if they never existed. 5. Regional variations. When panics spread. While Central Europe burned thousands, other regions saw fewer trials. Iberian Peninsula, Spanish Inquisition, focused more on heresy than witchcraft. Fewer demographic wipes. Scandinavia. Norway saw drowned witches. Sweden opted for beheadings and burnings. Russia. Belief in sorcery persisted, but state control limited mass trials. Upon closer inspection, these terrified animals revealed signs of malice. They foamed at the mouth, belched smoke, gurgled blood. No vet or priest could explain their afflictions. But when Matthew Hopkins arrived, he did. Hopkins was a self-proclaimed witch-finder general, arriving in villages just as a bad harvest or plague epidemic broke, and he diagnosed them all the same. These afflicted animals weren't sick. They were possessed by demons lent to them by a witch. And soon enough, he always found one to blame. 3. Demonic contracts and the mark of the beast. Many accused witches were said to sign bargains with the devil. In return for powers and worldly gains, they gave him something irreplaceable, their soul. To prove such dealings, Hopkins looked for the mark of the beast, usually a birthmark, unusual physical feature, or even an unexplained mark made during surgery. Birthmarks were branded as marks of the beast. Uncanny resemblance to biblical passages which described a creature with 7 heads and 10 horns and the number of a man named Nero Caesar added further to the confusion. The story goes that Nero Caesar was born on the 15th day of July, the 666th day after the founding of Rome. This wasn't the only biblical code relating to the Antichrist. According to the book of Revelation, he would also cause the world to bow down to an image bearing the inscription 666. One especially dramatic trial involved a young woman named Rebecca Nurse in Salem, whose forehead bore a spot that jurors deemed suspicious. Eventually they reached the conclusion that it was probably a birthmark, but not before concluding that it could be the mark of the beast. 4. Spectral evidence, when ghosts take the stand. Spectral evidence referred to testimony offered by those who claimed to have seen the ghost or spectre of someone accusing them of cursing them or causing them harm. Such visions, which were often contradictory, formed the basis of accusations. For example, if 2 people claimed to see the ghost of a person who died suspiciously, each describing a different set of circumstances surrounding their demise, then both accounts could be accepted as valid. The ghosts, it seemed, couldn't be cross-examined, so their say was final. What's more, they could testify to other things too, like secret acts of wrongdoing that only the accused and the victim would know about. 5. Witch tokens, a world turned upside down. To uncover the truth behind tokens, we need to travel back to the 17th century, a time when a wave of witch hunts swept across Europe and North America. During this era, there was a widespread belief that witches used objects known as witch balls or witch bottles to protect themselves against detection and prosecution. And because these tokens were associated with witches, their presence in a home suggested the owner was either a witch or in league with the devil. There are many variations of these tales, and most are difficult to confirm since very few witch tokens exist today. They were typically destroyed to break any curse or prevent a witch from continuing their nefarious activities. However, records do suggest that some of these tokens may have been crafted by persecuted witches as talismans for protection, especially in countries like Germany, where glass-blowing was common. And although the authorities believed they were wards against detection, they may have actually been nothing more than simple ornaments. That ends our story today. If you enjoyed the episode and want to help us grow, please subscribe. It really helps us out. And if you haven't yet, you can check out the links in the description for ways to support the channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Until then, remember, knowledge is power. For centuries, the whispers of witchcraft evoked dread, a cacophony of cackles and bubbling cauldrons, painting images of hags and sinister covens bent on wreaking havoc on unsuspecting villagers. Misfortunes in livestock became incriminating. Vets, Notes on mysterious cattle deaths were read in court as proof of a witch as malevolent influence. A broken pig's leg was recast as sabbatical play. Court testimony, 1643, Essex. I found no mortal wound on the beast, only strange tracks in the mud and the smell of brimstone. I know now it was the witch's cat. But the story doesn't end here. The embers of an age-old faith refused to be completely extinguished. The mid-20th century dawned like an ember, glowing in ash. Centuries after the last pyres blackened European horizons, a quiet spark of rebellion flickered in the woodlands of southern England. In the moonlit clearing, a small circle of seekers gathered, scholars, poets, healers, each carrying a fragment of the old lore in journals, oral tales, or secret rituals passed down through generations. Under the swaying oaks, an enigmatic figure named Gerald Gardner lifted his voice, reciting lines he claimed were coaxed from an ancient, clandestine coven. For many, this moment marked not the resurrection of a medieval witch cult, but the birth of something new, a modern reclamation of the witch as healer, prophetess, and guardian of Earth's mysteries. In this episode, we traverse the winding paths that led from fear and bloodshed to empowerment and spiritual renewal. From post-war England's New Forest coven to feminist circles in America, we explore how 20th and 21st century practitioners rewrote the narrative, claiming the witch's craft for liberation rather than oppression. 1. From persecution to revival, the birth of Wicca. It was 1949 when Gerald Gardner, a retired civil servant and amateur anthropologist, invited a handful of initiates into what he called the New Forest Coven. Some historians dispute whether that gathering mirrored any true, unbroken lineage from medieval witchcraft. Others argue the coven was a creative synthesis of folkloric practices, Freemasonic ritual structure, and modern ceremony. Regardless, Gardner's timing was pivotal. The ravages of World War II had shattered old certainties. In villages still haunted by air raid sirens and the graves of the fallen, people sought solace in belonging to something ancient, transformative, and profoundly connected to the natural world. Gardner's book, Witchcraft Today, 1954, crystallized that yearning, presenting witchcraft as a surviving, pre-Christian religion of the British Isles. With chapters on seasonal Sabbats, the Wheel of the Year, and the duality of horned god and mother goddess, Gardner offered an appealing mythos shaped by names like Cernunnos and Arianrhod. Gardner's prose blended academic curiosity with theatrical flair. He described the chalk-ringed circle in which initiates swore blood oaths under a May moon, invoking the elemental spirits of earth, air, fire, and water. He credited Doreen Valiente, a poet whose lyrical contributions would become core to modern ritual, with refining his sometimes awkward invocations into chants that swirl like smoke around the altar. For the first time since the plains of medieval persecution, the word witch was reclaimed as an honorific, a title of power rather than shame. Yet this revival faced fierce critics. Anglican clergy derided Wicca as superstition. Psychologists labeled its practitioners deluded. In 1955, an article in the Sunday Graphic exposed Gardner's coven as a secret society, likening it to the Freemasons or Rosicrucians. Gardner responded by opening his own museum of witchcraft on the Isle of Man in 1959, displaying ritual tools, manuscripts, and artifacts claiming centuries-old provenance. The museum itself became ground zero for debates over authenticity. Was Wicca a mere modern invention or the hidden current of Europe's sacred past? Regardless of its origins, Wicca's influence spread rapidly. By the late 1960s, small covens had formed across Britain, the United States, and Australia. The movement's decentralized nature, covens and solitary practitioners, free to adapt rituals, ensured remarkable diversity. Some groups emphasized the goddess in her triple form, others focused on green witchcraft using wild-crafted herbs and folk healing. Across all traditions, however, one thread remained constant: the reclaiming of witchcraft from symbol of terror to emblem of community, healing, and ecological stewardship. Two key figures and texts in early Wicca. With our introduction complete, let's now examine the architects of this new path. How did they lay the foundation for modern witchcraft? First, we look to Gerald Gardner and his seminal work, Witchcraft Today, 1954. This book shattered preconceptions. It presented witchcraft not as superstition, but as a living faith. In it, he detailed initiatory rituals invoking the horned god and mother goddess, outlined the Wheel of the Year with sabbats like Beltane, Samhain, and Yule, claimed lineage from a diagonal coven hidden since medieval times. Though some scholars question whether any medieval coven ever existed, Gardner's text provided the movement's foundational mythos. His dramatic narration of candlelit circles and oath-bound initiates inspired aspirants to form their own covens. Next, we turn to Doreen Valiente, the poetess of modern witchcraft. She joined Gardner's coven in 1953 and profoundly influenced its liturgy. Her contributions include rewriting clumsy invocations into lyrical chants, e.g., transforming "Hear Now, O Ethereal," into the flowing "Hail and Rejoice, O Priestess of the Moon." Composing the haunting charge of the goddess, which reframed the divine feminine as a living, speaking presence. Preserving folkloric verses and charms in her anthology, Charge of the Goddess, Revised Editions 1969-1982. Valiente's poetry fused ancient-sounding cadence with modern sensibility, sealing Wicca's identity as both ritual art and spiritual practice. Finally, we must acknowledge Margaret Murray and her witch cult hypothesis. Though later discredited, her work galvanized early Wiccans. Published in 1921, it argued that persecuted witches belonged to a secret agrarian religion. Key points: identified recurring pagan motifs, fertility rites, sacred groves, and horned deities. Interpreted trial records as evidence of a coherent cult rather than isolated accusations. Though later archaeologists and historians debunked many of her claims, Murray's thesis galvanized early Wiccan thinkers. It provided a veneer of academic legitimacy and linked modern practice to a mythical lineage of European paganism. Now equipped with an understanding of the foundational figures and texts, we are poised to delve into the vibrant communities that rose during this era. 3. Cunning folk and neo-pagan revivals. Though Gardner's public revival drew attention, isolated practitioners kept traditions alive. Cunning folk. These local healers and hedge witches preserved folk magic in rural Britain and Ireland. They practiced herbalism, divination, and protective charms, often operating on the margins of parish life. As Wicca spread in the 1960s and 70s, these seasoned practitioners found new audiences. Dorothy Clutterbuck, an alleged inspiration for Gardner's coven, Clutterbuck combined county traditions with ceremonial ritual. Charles Cardell, who coined the title Wicca Man and publicly challenged Gardner's coven, sparking debates over tradition and secrecy. Festivals like the Glastonbury Fair, Escheaton 1970, and Starwood Festival, Est 1981, USA, became converging points for neo-pagans, drumming circles and herbalists, forging networks that transcended regional boundaries. 4. Feminist reclamation and witchcraft as empowerment. The second-wave feminist movement of the 1970s recentered the witch as a symbol of suppressed female power. Groups such as the Reclaiming Collective, founded 1979, California, rewrote rituals to emphasize gender equality, co-leadership of the goddess, and God, dismantling patriarchal hierarchies in ritual. Embodied spirituality, dance, chant, and embodied movement as acts of personal liberation. social justice, linking witchcraft practice to environmentalism, LGBTQ+ rights, and anti-racism. Narrative excerpt, 1975, Michigan Witches' Sabbath. Draped in red, you feel the pulse of the earth under your feet. With the athame raised, you claim the power the church denied, your voice, your body, your magic. 5. Global neo-paganism and eclectic paths. By the late 20th century, witchcraft traditions had diversified globally. Hecatian covenants, revivalist groups dedicating worship to Greek chthonic deities. Green witchcraft, focused on plant lore and eco-magical practices, often solitary and nature-based. Technomancy and digital covens, online sabbats, apps for astrological timing, and virtual circles connecting practitioners worldwide. This pluralism reflects modern spirituality's emphasis on personal experience over dogma, allowing practitioners to blend techniques from multiple traditions. 6. Persecution and prejudice in the 21st century. Though no state prosecutions mirror medieval trials, modern witch hunts persist. Violence in Africa and South Asia. Accusations of sorcery still lead to lynchings and social ostracism, particularly targeting elderly women. Moral panics and conspiracy theories. Online mobs and conspiracy movements, e.g. QAnon, accuse public figures of occult crimes, employing digital doxing as a form of shaming trial. Cultural appropriation. Debates. Tensions arise when non-indigenous practitioners borrow sacred rites from marginalized cultures, sparking backlash and calls for respectful exchange. Despite ongoing challenges, the narrative has shifted. The witch, once synonymous with fear and persecution, is now a symbol of empowerment, community, and spiritual awakening. The journey has been arduous, marked by centuries of persecution and erasure. Yet, witchcraft in popular culture. Introduction. From the earliest printed pamphlets to today's streaming platforms, the image of the witch has captivated audiences, shifting from grotesque villain to complex anti-heroine. In this episode, we trace the witch's journey through art, literature, cinema, television, and gaming, exploring how popular culture both reflects and reshapes our collective fears, fascinations, and fantasies about magic. Literary legacies. From Grimm to Atwood fairy tales and folklore, the brothers, Grimm, early 19th century, codified folk narratives, Hansel and Gretel, Snow White, depicting witches as cunning hags luring children. Their sanitized but still chilling versions cemented the witch as a figure of moral warning. Victorian Gothic. In late 19th century novels, authors like Bram Stoker, Dracula, 1897, and Algernon Blackwood, The Willows, 1907, used occult motifs to evoke cosmic dread, with magic as both a lure and existential threat. 7th century fantasy. From J.R.R. Tolkien's benevolent white witch figure, Galadriel, to Ursula Le Guin's morally ambiguous earthsea sorcerers, witches in fantasy literature grew multifaceted. They embodied power that could uphold or subvert social order. Contemporary voices, Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, 1985, and its later prequel, The Testaments, 2019, frame witchcraft as metaphor for female agency and subversion of patriarchal control. In speculative fiction, witches often stand at the intersection of gender politics and ecological concerns. Silver screen sorceresses, films Witch, archetypes Golden Age. Hollywood, Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 1937, introduced the evil queen, shape-shifting witch whose mirror and poison apple became genre templates. Meanwhile, noir films like Belle, Book and Candle, 1958, offered romanticized, glamorous witches navigating modern urbanity. Horror Renaissance. The 1970s and 80s saw a boom in witch-centric horror. The Exorcist, 1973, depicted demonic possession, with quasi-witchcraft undertones, while Rosemary's Baby, 1968, explored satanic cults. The Blair Witch Project, 1999, innovated found footage scares around folk horror. Blockbusters and franchises, Harry Potter, 2001-2011, normalized witchcraft as youthful adventure with magical education supplanting fear. Conversely, Catherine Bigelow's The Witch, 2015, returned to Puritan paranoia, using authentic period dialogue to evoke 17th-century dread. Bewitched, on the small screen, television's enchantresses, sitcom spells, Bewitched, 1964-1972, used witchcraft as comedic device. Samantha's charms solved domestic mishaps, reflecting 1960s gender roles and suburban anxieties. Dark dramas, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, 1997-2003, featured Willow Rosenberg's arc from shy teen to powerful witch wrestling addiction metaphors. Charmed, 1998-2006, presented sister witches defending innocence, blending soap opera tropes with supernatural lore. Modern Complexity, American Horror Story, Coven, 2013, and A Discovery of Witches, 2018-2022, highlight witchcraft's intersections with race, sexuality, and ancient mythology. Streaming platforms enable serialized deep dives into witch communities, exploring moral ambiguity and identity politics. Interactive magic, witches in gaming RPGs and MMOs, games like The Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim, 2011, and Dragon Age series, 2009-present, allow players to learn spells, brew potions, and align with mage factions, role-playing witches in worlds blending high fantasy and moral choice. Indie and narrative titles, The Witcher series, 2007-present, based on Andrzej Sapkowski's novels, foregrounds sorceresses like Yennefer and Triss, whose political machinations and personal agency subvert typical gender roles. Augmented reality, mobile apps like Harry Potter, Wizards Unite, 2019-2022, invited real-world exploration through magical lenses, demonstrating how digital technology re-enchants everyday spaces. The Witch as cultural mirror, popular depictions of witches often reflect contemporary anxieties. Feminist reappraisal. Modern media reclaims the witch as empowered outsider, challenging patriarchal institutions, seen in films like The Last Witch Hunter, 2015, and series such as Witches, 2020. Ecological parables, environmental horror, eco-horror, uses witchcraft tropes to warn of nature's vengeance. The Ritual, 2017, and Manifestation, Apocalypse, 2021, entwine green magic with climate collapse narratives, digital witch hunts, true crime documentaries and podcasts, witch trial podcasts explore modern moral panics, like QAnon occult conspiracies, underscoring how the witch archetype embodies societal fear of subversion. Conclusion of episode 18. From printed pamphlets and silent film era villains to bingeable streaming sagas and immersive video games, the witch's image has evolved from a tool of oppression into a multifaceted symbol of power, resistance, and transformation. As popular culture continues to reshape her story, the witch remains a potent lens through which we examine our deepest fears, desires. Witchcraft, beyond Europe introduction, while medieval Europe's witch hunts loom large in our collective memory, the shadow of sorcery and its suppression stretched across continents. In this episode, we leave familiar forests and cobbled towns behind to explore how accusations of witchcraft arose in diverse cultures, from the healing seers of West Africa to the spirit mediums of Southeast Asia and the indigenous shamans. of the Americas. We examine how colonialism, religion, and local beliefs intertwined, producing far-reaching patterns of persecution and resilience. West African traditions and colonial encounter pre-colonial magic. In societies such as the Asante and Yoruba, Babalawos, diviners, and Ajogun priests mediated between human and spirit realms, using Ifa and Juju rituals for healing and justice. Colonial legislation. European powers labeled these practices witchcraft, enacting penal codes, e.g., Nigeria's 1916 Witchcraft Prohibition Ordinance, that criminalized spirit possession and divination. Accusation. Dynamics. Under colonial law, accusations surged against women and the elderly, often tied to land disputes or social scapegoating. Case study, 1940s Ghana. A local priestess, Mama Afia, was arrested for sorcery after villagers blamed her shrine for a series of livestock deaths. Despite community support and traditional legal structures, colonial court found her guilty. Her public caning became a cautionary spectacle. Spirit mediums and witch trials in Southeast Asia animist roots. In places like Indonesia and Cambodia, dukun and bona fide mediums communicated with ancestors and nature spirits, performing exorcisms and fertility rites. State suppression. Post-colonial governments, influenced by Islamic or secular ideologies, viewed these traditions as backward, banning public rituals and detaining practitioners under public order statutes. Modern accusations. Rural witch hunts still occur, particularly targeting women accused of causing sudden illnesses with guna magic. Example, 2001 East Java. Siti Nurjati, a well-known dukun, was forcibly removed from her village after neighbors accused her of casting a death curse. She spent months in jail without trial, her reputation shattered. Indigenous shamans and witchcraft in the Americas. Pre-Columbian cosmologies. Civilizations like the Maya and Inca revered shamans, curanderos and pajis, as essential healers and mediators with the spirit world. Colonial demonization, Spanish Inquisition extended to the New World. Indigenous rituals were recast as heretical sorcery. Many shamans were tried and executed for alleged satanic practices. Syncretism and survival. Over centuries, practitioners blended Catholic saints with native deities, giving rise to Santeria, curanderismo, and peyote ceremonies that persist today. Historic trial, 1561, Mexico City. The trial of a Nahua healer, Maria Coatza, accused of using temazcal steam rituals to poison Spanish settlers. Although acquitted for lack of evidence, her case reveals colonial anxieties about indigenous knowledge. Contemporary witch hunts and human rights. Global overview. The UN estimates thousands of witchcraft-related killings occur annually, driven by poverty, epidemics, and patriarchal fear. Advocacy efforts. NGOs like International Needs and ADF. International work to secure legal protections and support survivors in regions from Papua New Guinea to Tanzania. Cultural revival. Simultaneously, movements reclaim indigenous spiritualities, hosting Mesoamerican Cosmovision festivals and Afro-Brazilian candomblé ceremonies free from stigma. Interview excerpt, 2023, Kenya. We honor our grandmothers' ways now openly, celebrating healing songs instead of hiding them. Yet we must fight laws that still brand us criminals. 5. Comparative analysis, colonial power and witchcraft, accusations, scapegoating mechanisms, across cultures, marginalized individuals, women, ethnic minorities, the elderly, become targets during crises, drought, disease, economic collapse. Legal instruments. Colonizers and post-colonial states alike have used witchcraft laws to consolidate control, suppress dissent, and appropriate indigenous lands. Resilience and adaptation. Despite persecution, traditional healers adapt through syncretism, legal challenges, and global networks linking diasporic communities. Conclusion of Episode 19, Witchcraft Beyond Europe, reveals a tapestry of spiritual wisdom entangled with power struggles, from colonial courts to modern human rights battles. These stories underscore how fear of the unseen often masks deeper conflicts over authority, identity, and survival. Healing as witchcraft, gender, power, and medicine. Introduction: from the village apothecary's humble herb rack to the halls of Renaissance universities, medical knowledge has long straddled the boundary between accepted science and forbidden magic. In this episode, we trace how healers, especially women, were alternately revered and reviled, exploring the gendered dynamics, institutional power struggles, and evolving definitions of legitimate medicine. Medieval healers, wise women, and barber surgeons, wise women and herbalists, often the first line of care in rural communities. They prepared salves from comfrey and woundwort, delivered babies, and treated fevers. Barber surgeons, male practitioners combining haircut, bloodletting, and basic surgery. Recognized by guild charters, yet frowned upon by university-trained physicians. Tensions and accusations. When a patient died or suffered complications, the wise woman's remedies could be reinterpreted as poisons or curses. Meanwhile, barber surgeons faced accusations of diabolism when anatomy dissections were seen as desecrating the body. Case vignette, 1328, Toulouse. Guillemette, the healer, was summoned before the consuls after a failed childbirth. Her application of hellebore root was blamed for fetal death. She narrowly escaped banishment by swearing an oath at the cathedral. Renaissance medicine as witchcraft universities and physicians. Graduates of Salerno, Bologna, and Padua held monopolies on learned medicine, publishing Hippocratic and Galenic texts. They considered folk remedies unscientific and potentially heretical. Regulation and licensing. City councils required healers to register and undergo examinations. Unlicensed practitioners risked fines, imprisonment, or trial for sorcery. Professional rivalries. Physicians accused local midwives of witches' stabs and herbal oaths. Midwives denounced physicians' high fees and inaccessible Latin tomes. Document excerpt, 1565, Venice. The Collegio dei Medici decreed that no woman shall administer any compound without first presenting her recipe book for inspection. Any deviation invites the charge of maleficium. Gendered power and the witch doctor. Dichotomy, women's marginalization. Medical theory linked female bodies to unpredictability. Menstruation and childbirth associated with impurity. Healers who specialized in women's health were under extra scrutiny. Male authority. Male physicians held university degrees, controlled academic discourse, and influenced legal definitions of witchcraft. Resistance and solidarity. Midwives formed guilds and sisterhoods, sharing knowledge in coded manuscripts to evade oversight. Dramatic excerpt, 1682, Paris. A midwife's guild met in secret attic parlours chanting blessings in Provençal, so magistrates would not understand. Their spiritual care for women doubled as feminist act. Enlightenment reforms and medical professionalization, scientific revolution. Figures like Paracelsus challenged Galen, promoting chemical remedies. Hospitals emerged, emphasizing empirical observation over divine intervention. Legal changes. Witchcraft statutes gradually repealed, medical licensing became standardized, yet accusations of malpractice replaced witch trials in courts. Public health versus tradition. Governments funded smallpox inoculation campaigns, while rural communities feared needles as instruments of demonic injection. Historical note, 1796, London. Dr. Edward Jenner's vaccination against smallpox faced moral panic. Pamphlets warned it spread animal diseases, echoing earlier curses against herbal inoculations. Contemporary alternative medicine and modern herbal witches, New Age and holistic healing, practitioners of naturopathy, homeopathy, and energy healing, draw on folk traditions, sometimes clashing with medical boards over efficacy and licensing. Regulatory debates. Herbal supplements in pharmacies navigate labeling laws. Some regions require traditional medicine diplomas, stigma, and celebration. While some criticize pseudoscience, others embrace ancestral herbal wisdom, reclaiming practices suppressed by colonial and medical authorities. Interview excerpt, 2024, Portland. I harvest elderflower each spring for elder cordial, my grandmother's recipe. It's more than tonic, it's lineage in bloom. Conclusion of Episode 20. The story of healing as witchcraft reveals shifting power dynamics, where gender, institutional authority, and cultural values determine which practices are deemed legitimate. As modern medicine and alternative healing continue to intersect, the shadow of the medieval witch reminds us that the frontier of care often lies where the known meets the unknown. Intersectional witchcraft. Race, class, and sexuality. Introduction. Witchcraft accusations never occurred in a vacuum. They intersected with social hierarchies, targeting not only women but also the poor, people of color, and sexual minorities. In this episode, we examine how race, class, and sexuality shaped the witch hunts, from colonial plantations to early, modern Europe, and how contemporary practitioners reclaim witchcraft as an inclusive identity. Class and the scapegoating of the poor, economic vulnerability. Impoverished villagers, beggars, and itinerants were easy targets when harvests failed or epidemics struck. Lacking resources to defend themselves, they often faced accusations of causing misfortune. Case study, 1645, Germany. During the 30 Years' War, destitute refugees accused of witchcraft were rounded up by local militias, blamed for plague, outbreaks, and crop blight. Race and colonial witch. Hunt's African diaspora. Enslaved Africans brought spiritual practices, obeah, vodun, santeria, that colonists demonized as witchcraft. Legal codes in Barbados and Jamaica punished obeying these rituals as capital offenses. Indigenous peoples. In North America, indigenous healers were sometimes tried under Puritan witch laws, while in Latin America, black and indigenous midwives faced Inquisition trials for preserving ancestral medicine. Sexuality and the witch as queer. Icon nonconformity as threat. Women living outside heterosexual norms, midwives without families, lesbian partnerships, gender non-conforming individuals were suspected of consorting with the devil. Historical example, 1590 Scotland. Records mention 2 women tried for witchcraft after rumors of a sinful marriage alongside allegations of demonic pacts. Modern reclamation. Queer witches reclaim symbolism, using witchcraft as a means to challenge heteronormativity and create chosen families in covens. Intersectional solidarity in contemporary witchcraft, inclusive covens, modern. Neo-pagan groups adopt anti-racist, anti-capitalist frameworks, explicitly welcoming LGBTQ+ members and racial minorities. Rituals for justice. Spells and ceremonies targeting systemic oppression, banishing racism, invoking ancestral lineages of marginalized communities. Narrative. Excerpt 2025 Virtual Coven. Circle formed of Black, Indigenous, trans, and queer practitioners raise their voices in song, calling on ancestors to guide collective healing. Conclusion of Episode 21 by exploring witchcraft through the lenses of race, class, and sexuality. We uncover how power imbalances fueled persecution and how modern practitioners turn those histories into tools for solidarity and liberation. As the series continues, Episode 22 will examine the business of witchcraft, from witchcraft-themed tourism to the commodification of spirituality. The business of witchcraft, tourism, commodification, and spiritual entrepreneurship. Introduction. In the 21st century, witchcraft has become not only a spiritual practice, but a booming cultural economy. From themed tours in historic witch trial sites to best-selling tarot decks and wellness retreats, the commodification of witchcraft raises questions about authenticity, ethics, and the fine line between celebration and exploitation. Witch Tours and Heritage Tourism Salem, Massachusetts. Annual haunted happenings draw tens of thousands of visitors with guided walks, museums like the Witch House, and high-priced reenactments of 1692 trials. Pendle, England. The Pendle Witch Trail offers map-based self-guided tours, audio dramas, and cottage B&Bs decorated in witch chic. Ethical considerations. Critics argue that sensationalizing persecution risks trivializing historical trauma. Some tour operators partner with educational non-profits to balance profit with respect. Merchandise and media licensing, books and decks. The global tarot market exceeds $100 million annually, with indie publishers producing bespoke decks featuring diverse art styles and inclusive narratives. Film and TV franchises, streaming platforms license spin-off merchandise, clothing lines, collectible figurines, and branded candles tied to shows like Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, small batch artisans. Etsy shops churn out handmade wands, resin charms, and ritual kits, often sold at farmers' markets and craft fairs. Wellness industry and witchy, branding, crystal healing, and aromatherapy. Retailers market gemstones, essential oils, and sound bowls as tools for empowerment, packaged in minimalist, pastel-labeled witch aesthetic. Retreats and workshops. Yoga studios and holistic centers offer weekend witch retreats, combining meditation, tarot readings, and moon ceremonies with premium pricing. Critique of appropriation. Some practitioners condemn the co-option of ritual symbols for Instagrammable experiences, urging consumers to support indigenous and marginalized creators. Spiritual entrepreneurship and legal frameworks, licensing and regulation. In some jurisdictions, card readers and energy healers must obtain business licenses or disclaimers to operate legally. Online platforms Patreon and Ko-fi enable working witches to monetize teaching, spellcasting, and mentorship, blurring lines between ministry and commerce. Tax and zoning issues. Home-based craft businesses face zoning restrictions. Discussing tax write-offs for ritual tools and studio spaces becomes part of the modern witch's toolkit. Balancing commerce and community collaborative models. Co-ops like the Witchy Artisans, collective share profits, host communal pop-up markets and pool resources for ethical sourcing of herbs and crystals. Community-supported witchcraft. Subscription mystery boxes pledge that proceeds fund social causes, e.g., reproductive justice, indigenous land defenders. Narrative excerpt 2025 Virtual Summit. You log into a global summit where founders of inclusive covens and eco-magical startups discuss fair trade incense and mutual aid circles, redefining witchcraft as both spiritual path and social enterprise. Conclusion of Episode 22. The business of witchcraft reveals a dynamic interplay between tradition, innovation, and commercialization. As practitioners and entrepreneurs navigate ethics, authenticity, and profit, the question remains: how can a practice rooted in resistance resist being consumed? Witchcraft and the natural world introduction. Nature has always been both ally and adversary to those labeled witches. In this episode, we root ourselves in the Earth's cycles to examine how plants, animals, and elemental forces shaped folk magic and modern eco-spirituality. From medieval herb manuals to contemporary green witches, we trace the sacred relationship between witchcraft and the living world. Medieval herbalism. Roots in the soil key. Herbals, the Physica of Hildegard of Bingen and the Leech Book of Bald, catalogued hundreds of plants detailing medicinal uses and symbolic correspondences. Doctrine of signatures. Healers believed plant shapes signaled their uses, e.g., lungwort leaves resembling lungs for respiratory ailments. Case Vignette, 1382, Norfolk. A healer named Elsbeth Hargreaves used agrimony to staunch bleeding and St. John's wort to mend spirits. Her herbarium notebook contained coded annotations to hide precise recipes from prying magistrates. The language of flora, plant symbolism and ritual floral correspondences, roses for love, poppies for sleep, oak for protection. Witches wove herb bundles on Lammas, August fir, for hearth blessings. Flower guilds and festivals. In France, harvest festivals included herb brides. Young women, crowned with marigold garlands, meant to ensure fertility. Literary excerpt from the 15th century herbal poem Metrical Dressings. Gather rue beneath the moon's pale maid, wrap in linen, let no light invade. Bind to breast when sorrow calls, and balm shall fall like gentlest shawl. Animal familiars, companions of spirit, traditional familiars. Cats, toads, birds, and hares were thought to carry spirit essence and aid in spellwork. Ecological. Reality. Many traditional familiar animals played roles in pest control and crop protection, grounding folkloric beliefs in observed behavior. Historic testimony, 1624 Würzburg. A witness described seeing Ursula Koch's black cat vanish into thin air, leaving behind scorch marks, a testimony both fanciful and born of fear. 4. Elemental magic: earth, air, fire, and water. Earth magic: root work and runic carving in stones for grounding and protection. Air magic: use of incenses, feathers, and wind chimes to carry prayers and dispel malicious spirits. Fire magic: bonfires on Beltane and Imbolc to cleanse communities and invoke purification. Water magic: spring water libations, sea salt baths, and moonlit river crossings for healing and divination. Modern eco-witchcraft: guardians of the green witches, solitary practitioners deeply attuned to local ecosystems. They forage responsibly, practice seed saving, and lead rewilding rituals. Earth-based rituals: circle rites held in sacred groves. Seasonal sabbats celebrating solstices, equinoxes, and cross-quarter days with communal planting and harvest ceremonies. Narrative excerpt 2025 Redwood Grove. Under towering redwoods you place oak acorn offerings into moss-covered bark hollows, calling on ancestors and future generations in a ritual of reciprocity. Conservation and community. Witchcraft as ecology activist, spellwork. spells targeting environmental destruction, banishing clear-cutting, blessing reforestation projects. Collaborative, gardens, witch circles maintain community herb gardens, teaching botanical knowledge across generations and cultures. Case study 2024 Ireland. The Derry Organic Coven partnered with environmental NGOs to restore peat bogs, blending ritual with science to heal the land. Conclusion of episode 23 Witchcraft and the natural world share a symbiotic bond, one that honors cycles of growth, decay, and renewal. By weaving magic into ecology, practitioners remind us that the sacred is not apart from nature, but woven within its very roots. Witchcraft and legal reforms. Abolition of witchcraft laws and historical redress. Introduction. While centuries of witch trials left scars across continents, the dawn of legal reforms signaled a turning point. Enlightenment thinkers challenged superstition, and modern governments began dismantling witchcraft statutes. In this episode, we trace the arc from draconian laws to official apologies, examining how societies confront past injustices and honor survivors' legacies. Early legal reforms in Europe. 18th century Enlightenment. Philosophers like Voltaire lambasted witch trials as barbaric, urging rational justice. In Britain, the Witchcraft Act of 1735 transformed belief in witchcraft into a punishable fraud rather than a capital crime. Scandinavian abolition. Denmark-Norway repealed witchcraft statutes by 1686. Sweden followed suit in 1779, replacing them with laws against blasphemy and fraud. Case highlight, 1736, Scotland. The Witchcraft Act abolished the death penalty for witchcraft, though prosecutions for supposed sorcery lingered under other statutes for decades. Enlightenment, critiques and repeals, philosophical challenges. David Hume's essays on miracles questioned the reliability of spectral evidence. Cesare Beccaria's treatise on crimes and punishments, 1764, argued against torture and capital punishment. Legal milestones. France abolished witchcraft charges during the Revolution, 1790. The Papal States ceased ecclesiastical executions. In 1782, under Pope Pius VI, the residual laws. In some regions, residual statutes against superstitious practices remained on the books well into the 19th century. Modern acknowledgements and exonerations, state apologies. Germany's East Prussia. Government formally apologized in 1925. Switzerland's Canton of Glarus exonerated Anna Goldie in 2008 as Europe's last witch. Memorial legislation. In 2021, Ireland passed a bill to pardon all historical witchcraft convictions, establishing a fund for educational memorials and survivor descendants. Academic commissions, universities in the UK and USA launched research projects, cataloguing trial records, hosting symposia, and recommending public history initiatives. Transitional justice and public memory memorials and museums. Denmark's National Museum features exhibits on witchcraft persecution. Salem's memorial in Proctor's Ledge honors the 20 executed in 1692. Reconciliation ceremonies. Annual remembrance rituals at former trial sites, including candlelight vigils and restorative circles, led by neo-pagan and interfaith groups. Educational. Outreach. School curricula in Quebec and Saxony now include modules on witch trials, integrating survivors' narratives to foster critical thinking about justice and prejudice. Conclusion of Episode 24. The abolition of witchcraft laws and subsequent efforts at redress illustrate how societies can reckon with painful legacies. By repealing outdated statutes, offering formal apologies, and preserving memories through public history, communities transform shame into opportunities for learning, healing, and justice. Witchcraft in Education and Academia. Introduction as witchcraft. Studies move from the fringes into academic halls. Educational institutions shape narratives of persecution, practice, and revival. This episode examines curricula, exhibitions, research, and community partnerships that bring witchcraft's complex legacy into classrooms and public discourse. University courses and curricular interdisciplinary programs. Universities like the University of Exeter and Central European University offer modules combining history, anthropology, and religious studies to explore witch trials and modern paganism. Course. Example: Magic, Religion, and Science in Early Modern Europe covers theological debates, trial records, and the transition to Enlightenment thought. Pedagogical approaches: use of trial transcripts in translation, role-playing simulations of inquisitorial hearings, and primary source analysis to foster critical thinking.